excited to have my friend Karen Witemeyer back. And y'all know I love her books. Am I wouldn't necessarily call myself a cowboy romance person, but I'm a Karen Witemeyer romance person. And so by extension, I am a cowboy romance person. And so Karen, it is just so much fun to have you back. Do you want to take just a moment to introduce yourself? And then we're going to start talking about this lovely book and some of your other books.
Thanks, Kara. It's so fun to be here. And I love getting a chance to talk about books with people who love books. And I know that you are an avid writer and reader and just overall book person. So I'm thrilled to be here. I'm Karen Witemeyer. I write for Bethany House and I write historical Western cowboy romance. All of my books are set in Texas. I didn't grow up here, but I moved here to go to college, got married, and never left. So it's become my new home state.
Yeah, I think that's something that we have in common that I always forget about because I am not an Indiana girl, but I am an Indiana woman because I married an Indiana boy and we moved here. And I used to say I wasn't from Indiana, and I'm like, I've lived here over 20 years now. I think I should say I'm from Indiana, even though it doesn't feel like it. But it
But
does hit a point where you just kind
yeah,
of have to adopt the state, doesn't it?
yeah. Well, and all of my children were raised here. So, I mean,
Yeah.
they're all native Texans. So I kind of feel
Yeah.
like I should claim it too.
I know. Well, that's the thing. Three of my kids were born here. All four of them were raised here. They feel like they're Indianans. I'm like, I guess I just should call it my adopted state. I don't know why that's so traumatic to me. But you have definitely embraced Texas, as is shown in If the Boot Fits and so many of your other amazing books. Why did you fall into cowboys? Because they're not modern cowboys, these are all historical, and they're so much fun. How did you find the fun in cowboy?
Well, I grew up loving cowboys. So I grew up in the 70s. I'm going to date myself here. In the 70s, and that was the era of all the TV Western reruns. So like Saturday mornings, once I outgrew cartoons, I was watching Westerns all day long. So I loved, Bonanza, The Big Valley, Wagon Train. I mean, all of these, and they all had these wonderful cowboy heroes that I just thought were wonderful. And so that influenced me. And of course, the books that I chose to read were books like Little House on the Prairie and Anne of Green Gables. And so I've always been drawn to the historical side of things. And I think for me, it kind of enhances the fairy tale aspect of the romance to kind of escape into a different time. And so that was kind of how I chose that genre, is because it's what I love to read. So being able to share that love as I write was fun as well.
I love that. And I remember watching a lot of those shows on reruns, but those books that you mentioned, grew up loving them. I mean, I just ran across my copy of Little House on the Prairie this weekend because I was, that January purge, did not get rid of it. It is still in its place of honor because I think I
It's good.
read it like 6 or 7 times by the time I was 10. Anne of Green Gables, I think I have 5 copies of it at the house, and I'm not getting rid of any of them because I think Gilbert Blythe was my first crush. Um, you know, Everybody has to have their first book crush, and I think he's the perfect one. And so there's so much to love about those classic, books that you read as you're growing up. But not all of us turn around and go, but that's kind of the genre I'm going to write. There has to be something that, as you're thinking about the books you're going to write, like If the Boot Fits, that draws you in and says, I want to recreate that type of book. What do you think from those earlier influences got incorporated into If the Boot Fits?
Well, of course, this is book 2 in my Texas Ever After series. So these are fairy tale retellings. And I was a Disney kid growing up as well. I loved all of the classic Disney movies. And so the first book in the series was a retelling of the Snow White story. And so this one is a retelling of the Cinderella story. And so it was a lot of fun giving that. I mean, fairy tales have been retold many, many, many times. And they have different aspects depending on how the author chooses to retell them. Some are done in contemporary settings, some are done in science fiction settings. I mean, it's just a whole wide spectrum. but I hadn't really seen very many that had been done in a Western setting. And since that was kind of my brand, my home base, I thought, that would be really fun to mix those two and have a Western spin on the classic fairy tale.
And you did it so well with the first one because the seven dwarfs were just all a hoot. They were an absolute hoot. These retired cowboys and the way they show up and the different personalities that they bring to it. But now with the retelling of Cinderella, when I think of Westerns, when I think of cowboys, I don't necessarily think of palaces and balls and things like that. So did you have to kind of stretch your imagination to recreate those elements? Or did you go, no, I'm getting an influence from Cinderella, but I'm doing a completely new spin on it?
So it is a very loose retelling. So it's kind of inspired by, but I give a lot of nods to the original. And so it's going to be, I think it'll be fun for the readers to try to find all of those little subtle winks to the original, Disney movie. But I did do several things differently. So you mentioned, balls and palaces and stuff like that. So I have so at first it was a genre, a gender switch. So it's kind of a Cinderella story. So the cowboy is the poor broke cowboy who has a stepmother and two stepbrothers to provide for, and then the daughter is the daughter of the cattle king of the county, and so he's very rich and powerful. Throws a ball for her to try to introduce her to eligible people that he would consider good for her. So we have the hero come. He's not there for the ball. He's there for his own reasons. I can't give it away too much, but I think the hardest thing for me was figuring out how to leave a cowboy boot behind. Because if you think about it, a woman can lose her shoe pretty easily. They're not
Yeah,
strapped on,
you could just
that
step out of it.
right, exactly. But cowboy boots are hard to get off. So this
Yeah.
this isn't just an accident that could happen, and so I had to find a way to have him purposely leave. Well, he doesn't purposely leave the boot, but he purposely takes the boot off to try to accomplish something and then drops it while he's trying to get away, and so it's left behind. But I think that was my biggest plot struggle of how do I get him to leave a boot behind, because they don't just fall off. So that was that
So
was the
funny.
trickiest part.
That's hilarious. It makes so much sense, but I don't know that I would have thought of that being the brainstorming point where you're like,
Yes.
okay, now how am I going to make this work? Um, and so was that the hardest part of writing the story? Or was there another part that you had to research or that made you go, huh, I wouldn't have expected to learn this, or it was extra difficult or quirky as you were working on the book?
So one of the things I really wanted to do with this story is redeem the stepmother character, because
Mm.
in fairy tales, stepmothers are always evil. And
Yeah.
I mean, there are some really wonderful, kind-hearted stepmothers out there who welcome these children into their homes and just love them. And so that was a big thing for me. I wanted to make the stepmother a loving, kind-hearted woman, and not the evil person that she's often portrayed as in the fairy tales. So that was a big switch that I wanted to do. But with that done, who's the villain going to be?
Yeah.
So so now I had to, okay, I still want to stay within the confines of the original story, but who could I have be the villain now? And what is that person's motivation going to be? And, so that was kind of an interesting plot struggle for me to kind of figure out as well. But it was important to me. And there's a couple of different older women that play kind of the godmother role, for not for him, but for her.
Oh,
In the
fun.
story. She has an aunt, and then also this stepmother, for the hero, also kind of steps in and has a mentoring role for the heroine as well. And so it was kind of fun to kind of mix things up a little bit, but still have a lot of nods to the original.
I love that. It sounds like you just had a lot of fun playing with the elements and just kind of throwing them all up in the air and seeing what would happen and what would stick. That had to be just a lot of fun to come up with. So when you're thinking about, how you're writing, and you've been writing for a while, you've written a lot of really award-winning books. They're fantastic. They invariably jump to the top of my to be read pile because I know that when I get a Karen Witemeyer book, it's going to be phenomenal and one that I can just really sink into. But if you could go back in time and whisper some advice into the ears of young Karen as she's starting to write, what would you tell your younger self?
I think that I would try to take the pressure off. So as a young unpublished author, there was a lot of pressure of, I have to sell right away. I have to be what the publishers are looking for. And just, I think I would like to tell myself to just learn, enjoy the process, and wait for God to open the right door because I can't do it on my own anyway. I can't force that door open. I have to wait until it's His timing. And when I try to make it happen in my timing is when I get very stressed and things just aren't working right. So just kind of take the pressure off, still, have that drive to move forward, but just wait for God's timing because He knows when it's best.
That's awesome. And it's such a good advice too, because I think a lot of us tend to try and kind of help it along because we think that there's such a short time frame, and it's something that doesn't change no matter how many books we write. There is still a sense of where's that next contract coming from? What's the next book going to be? And so if we can learn early in just to kind of sink in and enjoy the process and enjoy the journey, it's going to help us in the long term. And so that's such good
Yes.
advice. So when did you first know you wanted to be a writer?
I maybe have a different author journey than a lot of people do. I was not one of those kids that always wanted to be a writer. I always wanted to be a reader. I didn't like to keep if someone made me keep a diary, it was like, that's painful. I don't want to have to write everything down. I just,
Yeah.
I lived with it in my head. So I would daydream a lot and I would, if I didn't like the way a book or a movie ended, I would rewrite it in my head and, those kind of things. And I was always very, very much of a sap. I loved romantic storylines and, all that kind of stuff. So I loved stories, whether it was, reading books or watching television or watching movies. I got lost in stories and I just loved them. I kind of, as I was getting older, high school, college, started toying with the idea of maybe someday, way off in the future, I might give that a try. But I was very focused on school and being successful there. And different people at different times that I respected, like college professors and things like that, would tell me, you're a really good writer. You should, of course, this is academic writing, it has nothing to do with fiction writing, but they would plant those little seeds and they started to grow. And as I started to consider maybe someday, I was a stay at home mom. I had 3 babies. The youngest wasn't even a year old yet. And my husband found out that his job was being cut and went into panic mode of, oh my goodness, I have to find something to do to contribute to the family income. I know, I'll finally start writing because I can do that and make money really quickly. Not realizing it would take me 6 years to sign a book contract. But, it was that little kick in the pants that got me to actually take someday and turn it into, no, you need to start working on that now. And so again, it was a God thing, worked out in the timing that He had laid out. I went back to work. I still work at Abilene Christian University as a day job and then write on the weekends. But that little push was what I needed to get that writing bug biting, and now it's got a good hold on me.
And we are all so glad it does. So when you're writing, where do you find joy in the process?
After it's done,
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, no, I writing some days is really, really hard. The words just aren't coming. I am a very perfectionistic writer, so I edit as I go and I'm constantly polishing, and I can't move on until I have the sentence as perfect as it can be. So I am a very slow writer because of that. But I also tend to write one really careful draft, and so I don't go back and re-edit over and over and over again. But there is something that when I have a really good writing day where the ideas are flowing and I don't feel like I'm having to pull teeth to get the words out of
Mhm.
me. That's a very satisfying day. It feels really good. So, but other than that, just when it's turned in and it's done, it's probably the
Yeah.
best part.
I know. There's something to those days where the words are just flowing and it just feels like magic. Like there's just this almost kiss from heaven where you're like, "Oh, it's so creative and it's wonderful." And right now I'm in the middle of that. It's work and
Yeah.
it's just ugh. And I know I'll have a magical day again, but right now I'm just like I feel like I'm beating my head against a wall.
Mhm.
And it's just like I got 500 words yesterday. And normally I'm a 2,000 to 2,500 word a day person. And I was just like, I am beating my head against a wall and it hurts
Mhm.
and it's painful. And I'm like, ugh. And my husband was like, why are you doing this? I'm like, because it's fun. You know, Someday it'll be fun
Can't you
again.
tell?
Yeah. When I get the book in my hand, it'll be fun. Darn it.
That's
So,
right.
so kind of the corollary to that, although I don't know if you still have this, but how do you handle setbacks? Do you have setbacks anymore?
Oh,
Um,
sure.
because I think,
Yes.
this is something we don't talk about. And you're the first person getting this question, but I had asked on some social because I'm doing a lot of these interviews right now. So I was like, hey, what kind of questions would you like me to ask? And this is one that came up. And as I was thinking about it, I was like, this is a good question. We don't talk about this a lot.
Mhm.
It's always like, oh, you got the first contract. Yay. And then we kind of go silent on all the setbacks and things that can come once you're published too.
Mhm.
So how do you handle that? And actually, that's not fair because actually you've had some really big ones too. Um, so how do you press through? Because there are some hard days. And so how do you press through when it's not easy and their joy's not there?
That's a good question. So, I mean, your faith is the big thing that's going to get you through. And there's all kinds of setbacks and all kinds of sizes of setbacks, So it can be getting a bad review. It can be an editor turning down an idea that you pitched. It could be, wanting to try maybe indie pub and you're terrified that you're going to make a muck of everything. I went through that.
Yeah.
And so um, there's just so many different ways that rejection and hardship can come. With my big Vivian thing, that was that was way up here, and
Yeah.
thankfully I had some divine intervention to help me get through that, and the community of Christian writers that just surrounded me with so much love and support. So I think your personal faith and your reliance on God is a big thing. And trust is so big because, like we were talking about, his timing, we don't know what doors he's going to open. When he closes one, that doesn't mean it's done necessarily. It just means you might have to look for where the other door is. But also being part of a community, whether it's your writer friends or your readers. I have a Facebook group called the Posse, and they are the best thing that's ever happened to me because they are so loving and so supportive and so eager to give to me and to fill up my well. I go to them for brainstorming help when I'm stuck with a plot point, or right now I'm getting ready to start writing a new project. So I'm like, okay, this is kind of a brief sketch of who my hero is going to be. What do you think he should look like? Show me some pictures. And they are so helpful and so eager to be part of that writing process. And so I really lean into that and get some strength from them as well as from my writer friends as well.
I love that. And I know that they love being invited into that process. And that's such a gift to them as readers as well. Um, so if you had an opportunity to have one of your books turned into a movie, which one would you pick?
I'd have to say Short Straw Bride because that is
Oh, I
hands
love that
down the
one.
one that readers love the most. And so if it was going to be anyone, I'd have to start with that one. Although,
And that would
you're tied to all of them. And so you'd love to see all of them. But
I know. That's on my bucket list. It would be so fun to have a book turned into a movie, but you're right. That one would be a fun one. It would be such a fun way to introduce people to your books too in a different medium. Okay, so a couple of quick questions before we wrap up. So, sweet or salty?
sweet
Tea or coffee?
tea for sure.
And okay, so tea, which kind?
I love black tea. I'm not really an herbal tea person. I like good old black tea sweetened with honey.
Okay, so like Earl Grey, Constant
Um,
Comment.
so I actually, sorry, this isn't very quick. I took a trip to Victoria, British Columbia with my
Hmm,
daughter. She was going to do an internship in Washington State, and we kind of took a little detour through there. I found Murchie's tea shop there, and I ever since it's been years, I order my tea from them. It is so good,
oh,
and they have so many different varieties of black tea. They have one named for Queen Victoria that was actually a blend that she would drink. And I mean, they date back
yeah.
to 1893 or something like that. And so
Wow.
they have an 1894 signature blend that I love. They have a Prince Charles blend that I love. They have a publisher's blend and an editor's blend that I also, those are my teas that I drink while I'm writing.
Oh,
So
that's
yeah, I have a whole bunch that I do through them.
oh, that's brilliant. And last one. How do you celebrate when you turn a book in?
Well, I just turned one in on Monday. This is
Yeah.
in January, so this is a different time frame from where this will be appearing. But I really didn't have much time to celebrate because it was, the end of Christmas and New Year's and everything. So I basically just took a day off and didn't write for a day. And we
Yeah.
had New Year's Eve and we had stuff like that. So I
So you had a
really
really
don't.
big celebration.
That's right. I really don't usually have a big thing. It's just I take a day or two to rest and then I have to start back in on the next project right away because I am such a slow writer. So
Yep.
usually it's turn it in, yay, okay, now I got to start working on the next one.
I know. So many of us are just those workhorses where we're like, okay, on to the next.
That's
And so,
right.
but readers love us for it. So,
That's
well,
right.
Karen, thank you so much for joining me today. It's always such a just a wonder to talk with you. And the next book is If the Boot Fits. And as with every Karen book, it's wonderful. And I highly recommend that y'all run out and buy it